The great nightlight of Japanese Odin Jesus is running low on Hanukkah juice, and it is up to you, the not currently on fire guy, to choose which unsatisfying ending to pick once you reach the celestial ashtray. In Dark Souls 3, aka what Dark Souls 2 should have been, aka what Demon Souls 4 would have been were Sony not so stingy with licensing, you play as an ashy motherfucker who is too stupid to buy cocoa butter, so he kills a bunch of dead people and plays musical chair with their heads instead. Bosses fall into two categories: day shifters that won't come into work unless you drive to their houses and pick them up, and entities that don't have any real reason to attack you other than taking one look at you and thinking, yeah, fuck that guy. The legendary Lords of Cinder, who alone are capable of jump-starting the spark of creation, include a she-male with a prolapsed anus, some slap-fighting Spanish inquisitors, the anthropomorphization of my penis, and the ideal woman according to the average Japanese pervert. Side bosses include Charlie Brown's kite-eating tree after it accidentally ate a black kid, a crystal sage that loves polishing his crystal balls, a pope that actually gets shit done, and a baby-squishing newt. Dark Souls 3 is basically game director Hidetaka Miyazaki fixing all the problems he had with Dark Souls 1, which in itself was a game he designed to fix all the problems he had with Demon Souls. 3 has Dark Souls 1's demon runes, but better! It reimagined Demon Souls' jail level, but better! And it has Bloodborne's combat, but slower and less challenging. Combat has been sped up overall, but the move pool has not been increased to take advantage of it. While having 10 unique variations of each weapon type leads to a great amount of personalization of builds, the lack of a unified moveset leads to shallow, mash R1 to win combat against most enemies and even against other players. Weapon arts are a bit clunky and are tied to a gauge that is replenished by a consumable rather than by performance. Other action games would have made weapon arts a reward for parrying or taking out an enemy with style. I'm not asking for Ninja Gaiden quality here, but having more than 6 attacks per weapon would be a nice change of pace. Magic, miracles, and pyromancies were baby boy mode in previous games, but are now so slow that they are only useful for blue phantoms that enjoy interfering with other people's duels from a distance like the fun-hating puritanical cunts they are. Invasions are completely broken this time around, in so much that you can only attack a player that already has someone else helping them along. This creates two major flaws. First, if you are like me and prefer the challenge of playing alone, you'll never be invaded outside of Pontiff Sullivan's papal play place. Second, if you enjoy invading, you might as well just skip the middleman and jam a bunch of plus 10 S-stocks up your booty hole. The artificial intelligence-controlled enemies scattered throughout the map should balance out the invader going up against a group of humans, but there is no method to rally enemies, and the other player is always alerted to the presence of an invader. So they'll always run back to the bonfire to summon more phantoms, and you'll always end up fighting alone against a group. The overworld doesn't link up like Dark Souls 1, and the areas lack the distinct design changes from place to place of Dark Souls 2. Overall, each area is polished, but they blend in so well from one area to another that it's all just a little bit bland. The graphics are okay. If you like these assets in Bloodborne, you'll like them again here, though I will say Bloodborne had a much narrower focus and had a better aesthetic as a result. Despite the overall high quality of Dark Souls 3, there are a few notable step backs from Dark Souls 2. In 2, completing a game cycle or burning a bonfire aesthetic spawned new enemies with improved movesets and superior drops. In Dark Souls 3, new game plus with just easy peasy mode for people that want to unlock a second ending quickly, and only some high level rings are added. The path of plot progression is pretty narrow, with the only option to jump forward being fighting the dancer early on, which is easier said than done. As in Bloodborne, armor in Dark Souls 3 is mostly a fashion statement. Burden only affects your stamina when you go over 70%, and since poise no longer lets you tank attacks, you never have an excuse to go over 70%. In fact, armor is so underwhelming in 3 that through most of my 4 playthroughs I played completely naked and had to throw out 2 office chairs as a result. There are some interesting changes, however. Boss fights have been revamped in so much that half of them require the player to attack certain weak points, use certain items, or perform certain coup de graces to win. So you can't just wail on everything until it dies. Hidden bosses like Champion Gundare and the Nameless King are so off the main path that the devs managed to really turn up the challenge. Unless, like me, you just pushing their shit anyways. Lore-wise, Dark Souls 3 is a competent follow-up to the original game that makes just a few smart nods to the Scholar of the First Sin and the Bearer of the Curse from Dark Souls 2. As with the other Souls games, the story is told more in location design, item description, and the behavior of bosses, rather than via cutscenes. The empty goblets and piled up bodies outside of Yorm's chambers, coupled with the descriptions from his soul and other related items, reveal that he was a Lord Offender that attempted to link the profaned flame, and his subjects, who gathered to celebrate his sacrifice, were destroyed instead. It's a pretty heavy subplot that most people will miss completely, and that's okay. Souls games have a sliding scale of lore competency that is entirely dependent on how observant the player is, rather than just spelling out everything for them. Were this a Bethesda or BioWare game, you'd probably stand before the kiln of the first flame with 4 options. X. Light fire. Y. Hate fire. A. I'm hungry. And B. Purchase DLC to activate option B. The theme of Dark Souls 1 was the end of an age and the decline of abundance. The theme of Dark Souls 2 was escaping the stagnant cycle of linking the flame by finding another way. And the theme of Dark Souls 3, as far as I can tell before the DLC drops, is something along the lines of denouncing abundance and embracing the harsh world of hollows instead. The Lords of Cinder, having refused to link the flame, signify a powerful desire to forget the warmth of Gwyn's bonfire, and the only endings that require extra effort are the ones where you fuck everyone over. Likely in the DLC, we'll find out just what happens when you stomp out the flame or swallow it whole. Overall, Dark Souls 3 is a pretty good game that ends the trilogy well. Hopefully, with the DLC, some rebalances to the main game will spice things up for further playthroughs. P.S. In the land of no-eyed cuties, my one-eyed monster is king. Some expected Dark Souls 3's downloadable expansions to answer the burning questions about the Dark Lord ending and the cycle of fire and dark. This first installment, Ashes of Ariandel, takes a tangential approach to expanding the lore by occurring in a faded painting that the player is tasked from burning from the inside so that world can be reborn. The explorable area is on the small size, about 2/3 as large as the Crown of the Sunken King DLC from Dark Souls 2. You'll explore a snowy field, a snowy hill, a snowy town, a snowy tower, a couple of snowy interiors, and a callback to the Darkroot Basin that most people will not enjoy. If I wanted a detergent rod forced up my ass as I clung to a tree, I'd have joined the Boy Scouts when I had a chance. Enemies include sleepy boys, angry boys that certainly aren't sped up Balder Knights, dogs, bigger dogs, the younger brothers of the Shadows of Yharnam, Jewish pilots, and Vikings on their way to Wally World. Bosses include a naughty nun, an angry elk eating soup, a dude who needs some cough drops, and the manifestation of apathy. It's like someone at From Software said, "Hey, wouldn't it be cool to fight Artorias and Sith at the same time? We could have an area distorted by the decay, with Artorias using both his sword and shield, Sith zipping around like a retarded asshole hopped up on goofballs, and mages mixed in there somehow too, shaking her gigantic orangutan tits all over the place. That would be totally boss." Then a producer came along, slapped that first guy across the back of the head, and said, "Bundle a generic NPC together with one of those big wolf enemies, then get back to adding vague details all around the map for English major burnouts to speculate about on YouTube." The primary boss is broken into 3 parts, but once you figure out the first 2 phases, it really is just a formality to get to the third. The fight overall is a great mix of one-on-one dueling, crowd control, and area of effect attack dodging, but the payoff disappoints. Sure, you get a soul that turns into a nifty weapon, but there is little effect on the painted world. If this were a Dark Souls 2 DLC, defeating the big boss would cause a fire that would melt half of the snow from the map, opening up a new area. Instead, your reward is the sound of fire and a couple of lines detailing how the world will burn and be reborn. Players who want to watch the world burn will just have to do it the old-fashioned way by voting for Hillary Clinton. To make up for the scant story content, From Software made the never-a-good-idea decision to split the user base by tying the new player-versus-player arena behind this pay-to-play DLC. Matches are generally fun and lag is rarely an issue, but there are some glaringly obvious problems that could have been avoided had the developers ever played a round of Halo Deathmatch. In Team Deathmatch, players are not color-coded by their team. Instead, arbitrary Covenant allegiances dictate what color a player glows, giving unallied players the advantage of blending in with the scenery. When a team is in the lead, little crowns float over their heads, and there is a health bar display on the left side of your screen with your teammate's name. Otherwise, the only way to tell if a person in front of you is the enemy is whether or not you can lock onto them. Simply making one team red and the other blue would fix this problem, and they better patch that shit in quick. There is also a major delay between landing a kill and the confirmation, which makes keeping track of your personal performance vague. Here I pull off 3 kills with one swing. Hearing triple kill or 3 jingles would let me know I actually got credit for the kills. Instead, I had to wait about 10 seconds to find out via text prompts that I only got credit for 2. The biggest issue I ran into during these matches were match droppers. Going into a 3-on-3 fight and ending it as a 2-on-3 or a 1-on-3 stinks. You'd think the game would give the remaining players on the depleted team bonuses to defense, attack, or speed. Instead, you're just completely fucked. Free-for-all death matches are lots of fun and also a complete clusterfuck that desperately need a display for other players' scores. Putting a little crown over the leading player's head helps slightly, but generally speaking, you're more likely to get killed crossing the map trying to reach the lead player than fighting them yourself. One-on-one duels are generally about as fun as the person you are playing against. Constantly gesturing and tossing potatoes can be fun, but near instantly ganking gesture rushing scrubs is immensely more satisfying. Asses of Ariana Grande. Took me about 3 hours to beat, and I spent another 5 on the multiplayer. $10 is a fair price of admission, but you insatiable sluts will probably pay the full $15 anyways. Thanks for your time, and good luck bringing that weak shit into my arena, motherfucker! This is my house! This is my knockdown little pillar thing! You do not come into my house with that weak shit! I will slap you in the face with my penis! After 3 Dark Souls games, 2 proxy games that might as well have been Dark Souls games, and 6 DLC packs, this supposed final entry in the Dark Souls series represents an opportunity to answer the burning questions about the lore that have lined the pockets of unemployed mythology majors for the past 6 years. Why didn't the Chosen Undead just toss some twigs and old newspapers on the first flame instead of doing a Richard Pryor impression into it? Why was Gwendolyn locked in a basement and forced to suck dick through a hole in a wall instead of being sent to Mike Pence's Shock the Gay Away conversion therapy camp? And perhaps most importantly, since Guinevere is just an illusion, is it morally acceptable to sniff her gigantic seat in Anne Orlando? By now you're all probably wondering, does this DLC even attempt to answer even one of these questions? And the answer is, of course not, you stupid motherfucker. A lot of people are bound to complain about the lack of closure provided by the Ring City, but Dark Souls lore was always meant to be open to interpretation. If the developers just spelled everything out for you, you'd wind up with the same kind of unsatisfying explanations that ruined Star Wars and Silent Hill. In fact, aside from the usual item descriptions, NPC invasions, and the placement of corpses, the biggest addition to the lore comes from big ugly preacher bugs who, like real-life priests, alternate between proselytizing and trying to eat your ass. Since they are literally bugs wearing human masks, you can't take them at their word, and it really brings home the idea that history is subjective. In terms of gameplay, the Ring City is mostly the same shit you're used to, falling out of a slightly different butthole. The first DLC, Angela's Ashes, was not the painted world of Ariamis. Like this new DLC is not Ulasil, like how I am not a registered sex offender. The Ring City reminds me visually too much of the rest of the game and never really feels like a unique setting. I get that the theme of Dark Souls 3 was fading embers, but if I really wanted to roll around in ashes, I'd just ask Michelle Obama to rub her elbows together over my head. Bosses include another player, an oversized bat-winged demon, a pissed-off lawn gnome, and Calamite. Sin. No, wait. I mean a completely new dragon boss. But don't get the wrong idea. The Ring City is not just more of the same. A good chunk of the city is guarded by invincible enemies that require strategic movement rather than just mashing R1 to defeat. which is good since my Afterglow controller's R1 button broke just before the first boss. And when you finally take those invincible guardians down, it's more satisfying than most games' bosses. A couple of demoted bosses show up as regular enemies, and I won't spoil the surprise, but needless to say, if you even think of spurting a semen smoothie on this sleeping beauty, you'll be the one with egg on your face. The Ring City includes some pretty good rings that you'll use for the DLC, a couple of matches of deathmatch, then never again since Miyazaki hates bonfire aesthetics, and New Game Plus mode still sucks a dick. Speaking of deathmatch, the 2 new levels included in this DLC make for a nice change of pace, but don't expect quick matchmaking if you don't select the random level select feature. Most Dark Souls 3 players don't have access to the deathmatch in general, let alone these new levels. Bungie always had enough sense to gift old multiplayer maps to the community when new map packs came out, but FromSoft seems to want as few people as possible to play their game, which is a shame. I put on my best ruffled Seinfeld shirt and waited 5 minutes before anyone would join my 3-on-3 match in the Dragon Ruins. While deathmatches are still fun, the lack of a basic capture the flag or King of the Hill mode means most team matches still boil down to who gets the first kill and keeps the other team undermanned for the entire time as a result. Teams still are not color-coded, and at times you'll wonder whether the other players are lagging or just plain cheating. Overall, I liked the Ringed City, but it felt more like a setup for a final DLC than a final DLC in itself. The final area is a good metaphor for this feeling. Once the boss goes down, you'll find yourself in a big empty area that looks like it might have something interesting hidden in a crevasse, but there's nothing.